Hey guys, it's MJ, and in this video, I want to try figure out what does it mean or what is a credit-linked note. So what I'm basically going to be doing is trying to figure out what this thing is, and I'm going to be talking to myself, so I thought, why not record and see what we can do. So hopefully this video, I will explain what a credit-linked note is by figuring it out with you guys. Okay, I do have the textbook open with me, but it is a little bit confusing because it says a credit-linked note is a collateralized vehicle consisting of a bond with an embedded credit default swap. Now, remember when we spoke about these things called credit derivatives? Okay, credit derivatives are just a fancy word or a fancy name for credit insurance. And the reason why they call it, credit default swap is so that they don't have to go through the regulations of setting up an insurance company, because essentially that's what it is. Credit derivative pays out on a credit event. So if someone defaults, then a payment is made, which basically is the definition of insurance. But like I said, they don't want to call it insurance because then they hold up by regulation, and regulation would require them to hold capital, which therefore can dilute the returns. So they've basically called insurance a derivative. Very, very sneaky. But then what they found out is that some people or some institutions are not allowed to buy derivatives. And rightly so, because derivatives are very risky. So how do these guys get around this? Well, they now call the credit derivatives something known as a credit-linked note. And what this credit-linked note is, it actually is credit insurance, but this time it is now defined as a bond. And remember, when it comes to, say, pensions or one of these massive institutions, they have their rules and their criteria that says, up to 60% of your capital needs to be invested in bonds. Bonds are seen as the safest investment. And so by making this credit insurance in a bond format, they can now make these things way more marketable, and they've got a much bigger target audience on which to buy them. So a credit-linked note is essentially credit insurance. In fact, it reminds me a lot of a catastrophe bond. Remember what a catastrophe bond is? A catastrophe bond, you lend, say, 100 Rand, and you receive your coupons of, say, 10 Rand, or let's make it a 1 year thing. Let's say you get 110 Rand back at the end of the year if no catastrophe happens. If a catastrophe does happen, then you get nothing. So you're getting the 10 Rand as a reward for taking on the risk. And this risk of a catastrophe is normally something very small, like say 1% of it actually happening. That's essentially what a credit-linked note is. Well, this is what I'm thinking. Remember, I'm figuring this out right here. Because when you start reading the notes, it gets very confusing. They can be used by the holder of a corporate bond to transfer the credit risk on those bonds to other investors. This is done by setting up a special purpose vehicle, which can then sell the credit-linked notes to investors and use the proceeds to buy risk-free government bonds. At the same time, the special purpose vehicle also sells a credit default swap based on the original corporate bonds to the original bondholder. You read that and you are like, what on earth is going on here? But when you start to break it down, you realize that it's not actually a bond. It is more of insurance. Although, interestingly enough, with the catastrophe bond, which is a form of insurance, yet I know it's got the word bond in it, this does get quite confusing. It's that, maybe let me show it here. Let me show it with the cash flows. So cash flows is, let's say you had to buy insurance, okay? You pay your premium, and then, so you pay your premium, let's say minus 10 Rand, and then if the event happens, you get paid your benefit of, say, 100 Rand. that's kind of how it works. So the cash flow, this is time 0, and this is sometime in the future, but you pay your premium. When the event happens, then the benefit is paid. Okay? With a credit linked note, and also with, say, catastrophe bond, what's happening is that you first getting the benefit. So that you get the benefit here. You get the benefit of, say, 100 Rand over here, and you only have to pay it back. Or if the event happens, you don't have to pay it back. Only if the event doesn't happen, so if this doesn't happen, then at the end, do you then pay, say, 110 Rand back as the premium plus the amount. So remember, this is time 0, and this is time in the future. So traditional insurance worked out as in, get the premium and I only pay the benefit if the event happens. With these credit linked notes, it's someone's basically paying you the money up front, which is lovely from your point of view, and you're only paying them back if nothing happens at the end. Now you might be thinking, why on earth will anyone purchase these things? Like, how on earth do they sell these? Well, you must remember that these asset managers have got targets to hit. They have to, we could basically make this as a relative performance video. Remember, there is a relative performance risk, okay? And relative performance risk is the risk that your competitors do better than you, so that you underperform. And if you underperform as an asset manager, you lose all your capital. Well, you not lose all of it, but people withdraw their money from you and they go put it with their investors. Why? Because, with their other asset managers who are giving much better returns. Think about it. If you had a choice between company A and company B to manage your money, company A got a 10% return last year, company B got a 20% return last year. You're going to say, okay, I'm going to go with company B. However, you might say, but what about the risk? However, you know that with asset management that they have regulations. And so much so, 60% has to go into bonds, 30% into shares, and maybe say 10% they can play with. So you're thinking, okay, well, they've got the same investment strategy. Company B must just be way smarter. But remember, 60% is bonds. Bonds, supposed to be boring, safe, sustainable. You're supposed to get a very low return with your bonds, but you have a very low risk. If I now introduce an instrument to you, and I say to these asset managers, well, check this thing out. It is a bond, but it's got a 10% return. A bond with a 10% return. That's like, wow, that's unheard of. Especially if, say, the government bonds are giving, say, a 1% return. And you say to yourself, well, it's risky. It really is risky, but I cannot afford to, underperform everybody else. So I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to buy these bonds. If there is no credit risk, I'm going to get a massive return. Okay, I'm going to either get a massive return, in which case everybody is going to come and invest their money with me the following year, which means I can make even more money from my fees and everything. And if the bonds do blow up, well, I was underperforming anyway, so I was going to lose all my money. So it's kind of like, let's go for a Hail Mary, let's go all in. There's nothing much to lose. And this comes down to the whole problem with, say, asset managers, is that if they fail, their loss is limited, but if they succeed, their gains are unlimited. So losses unlimited, losses are limited, gains are unlimited. It's almost like buying a call option. Okay, call option, remember, I'm running out of space here. Let me put it over here. Call option is that you've got minimum downside risk, but then all upside. And this is what it is with asset managers. So if they're sitting over here, and let's say this is performance, or how well their portfolio is doing, if they're over here, they're going to be, it's up to them to now say, or it's logical for them to take a massive risk, which can either push their portfolio down to here with say 50%, or push it up to here with 50%. And these really crazy credit-linked notes, which carry a lot of risk, have got the definition of a bond, which allows them to bypass the asset strategy or the regulation that says that 60% has to be within these safe assets. And this is what makes it kind of crazy now. Also, these credit-linked notes are, they are terribly complicated, terribly complicated, especially when you start looking at the fact that they can start setting up things known as multi-tranches. So, multi-tranche. So what this means is they can take their bond, which let's say has got some credit risk, and they can split that credit risk into different little packages. And they can use some nice little mathematical formulas, some credit models, which remember we've discussed are useless, to try and say, oh look, these things aren't as risky as they are, but they're just giving out a higher return. Then the whole greed factor comes in as well, and you can start seeing how crazy finance gets. And these instruments are so complicated that no one really knows what's going on with them. The asset manager knows he needs to outperform everybody else, so he's going to take up this risky position. Other asset managers, now to try and stay up with him or keep up with him, they also buy these credit-linked notes. So now there's this massive demand for these credit-linked notes because of their definition of a bond. But essentially, they are credit insurance that hasn't gone through the proper regulation, doesn't have necessarily the best capital, or another way is they're a credit derivative, which is incredibly risky. So we can start to see that even though we try set up these really good, what happened there? Even though we set up these really good rules of say, okay, this is investment strategy, your asset managers cannot deviate from this, we see that there is a way to go against it by using the definitions. And that's why to become an asset manager in some places becomes a tremendously administrative burden. And it can feel very frustrating because now institutions are saying to the asset managers, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. And then they're getting really stressed because they have to try and be company B, get the higher return, and try beat the other companies, but they can't do it because their hands are tied, and it just becomes crazy. So whenever a new instrument is introduced, like a credit-linked note, which has the nice definition of, say, a bond, they think, wow, this is my turn to get massive returns. And that's why I think relative performance risk is terrible that people make it a focus, because it can lead to these devastating things. And this was another player in the whole financial crisis. Like I said, they are complicated. Credit rating agencies don't really know what's going on with them. They want to maintain good relationships with the issuers, so they're going to give it a really great rating. People are going to have this false sense of confidence, and at the end of the day, it is a bit of like a house of cards. As soon as one goes down, the whole thing collapses. So it is really crazy, but the big message here, or the number one thing that I want you guys to take away from this, is that what these guys are doing, or what these fancy instruments are. I remember reading this the first time back when I was at university and thinking, why are they making these things so complicated? And the reason being is they want that definition. They want it to be known as a bond. And it even says it here, right at the end of the note, it says, such a collateralization may be attractive to investors who are not able to sell credit derivatives, but who are able to buy CLNs if classified as bonds rather than credit derivatives. So bam, in the textbook, they even just mention it right at the end, but they're not saying how messed up the regulations are or what a flaw there is in this financial system where we have these rules that can so easily be bypassed. And let me stop here because this is getting quite crazy with this whole finance. But yeah, that's credit linked notes. I think maybe let me leave this credit subject because yeah, it's gonna drive me insane. But anyway, thanks for watching. Next time we're going to be looking at, say, the other types of risks, like operational risk, market risk, and all those type of things. Also, liquidity risk. That's quite a fun one. Anyway, thanks guys so much for watching this video. Cheers.